We put our Christmas tree and Christmas decorations up, and I thought it is a great time of year to study the life of Jesus. So that is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing a series where we study the life of Jesus through all four of the Gospels. So Matthew is an eyewitness account, of course, from Matthew the Apostle. Mark is eyewitness accounts written by Mark, but about Peter. So it's basically Peter's eyewitness accounts that Mark wrote down. Mark basically was Peter's helper and would walk around and write things down for Peter. So that's how it's still considered eyewitness. Luke is actually a historical account, and it is written very similarly with a lot of other historical accounts that would be done back in that time, very accurately written and very different than the other books. Just so you're aware, Luke is the only historical account that's really the way that they would write history back in ancient Israel. And it's very interesting to compare the differences. Of course, John is an eyewitness account. He is John the Apostle. So all of these people were with, or the disciples, sorry, all of these people were with Jesus, except for Luke, who basically gained a bunch of accounts from other people. Some people believe he talked to Mary, he talked to Peter, Paul, and he also talked to Mark. Sorry, I had to check on that. Matthew is the first book of the New Testament. It's also the first gospel, and it's the perspective of Jesus' story through Matthew's eyes, who was one of his disciples who watched and experienced him. A few things to help you understand why these things are so obviously true. Back in Bible times, there were specific ways that were educated ways of writing down what happened. And so sometimes people judge things that are in the Bible, but they're actually the most accurate way of writing down history in that time. And a few things that really point to the fact that this is true is a lot of the disciples wrote a lot of things about themselves that seemed really off and bad. Most times, if you were trying to write a history about yourself, you would show the good things. Try to write a story of your life where you actually look like the villain or the bad guy. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to do that. You're going to want to present yourself as someone who's upstanding, who's doing really well, helping out, but they constantly portray themselves as kind of crappy people. They talk about how they fell asleep when Jesus was begging them to pray with him. They talk about when Jesus literally said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." These are things that they wouldn't want people to look back on in history, but they wrote them truthfully because that was what actually happened. Another thing is some people like to say the discrepancies are what makes it not true. I think the discrepancies honestly make it more truthful because it's the perspective of 5 different people. So if you're watching something happen and someone else is watching it from a different perspective, someone can gain other information that other people didn't gain. It doesn't mean that one is true or not true. It just means it's different perspectives. Finally, the one thing that really stands out to me is that when Jesus rose again, the first witnesses were women, and women at that time were not respected as witnesses. If you had a crime that happened in front of you and there were 3 women that witnessed it, they would not consider that enough proof to put away that person for that crime. Anyway, I think that's just super unique how Jesus chose specifically women to see him first. And that also proves that this wasn't a traditional story. Most times they'd say 3 really honored men in the society saw Jesus rise again. That's not what happened, though. It was 3 women. And I think that Jesus specifically just honors women in a different way and treats them with such reverence and respect. And I really do love that because sometimes as a woman, when you're reading the Bible, you don't see as much about women as you do as about men and really strong, courageous men. But when you look through the Bible, there are also lots of stories of really powerful women doing amazing things. And I feel like Jesus always likes to amplify the people that seem maybe in the culture less than. Women back in the day were not considered a priority or important or any of that sort. It was just you were kind of used as a bargaining tool to get married, to have children. That was what women were for. And Jesus elevated them to another level by making them the first witnesses. Kind of to go on a rant with women, because I know this is actually a reason that people say they don't want to believe in Christianity. Every time a culture has accepted Christianity, women have actually been treated better and had substantial benefit to their life as a culture became more Christian. Because in the sight of God and in the sight of Jesus, we are all created in his image. And so, therefore, if you are supposed to be kind to one another, if you're supposed to be honest and loving and truthful to one another, you have to do that to all, not just some. And so it's actually really interesting that a lot of the time in different religions and Muslim religion and other things, women have to be covered and hidden away, and they're not honored and respected in that way. But to Christianity, Jesus elevates them to a level where they are able to be a witness. They are able to share the gospel. They are important to the story of Christ and the Bible. Of course, there was the 300 witnesses that saw Jesus after he was resurrected. And a really big thing that I love to point out when people are doubting faith, because I went through a stage where I was doubting, and I really kind of woke up to like, I've never sat and questioned this. I've never thought really deeply about this. I kind of just accepted what my parents said. And for a long time, I kind of just started looking into other things. And I always came back to the truth of the Bible. Nothing else was as proven and backed up with history and archaeology and just so much information that is just so clearly written out. And even the way the Bible was written from beginning to end with different authors, but all, of course, inspired by God, and all of it makes sense and all of it is cohesive, written over thousands and thousands of years, and has been literally almost word for word perfectly kept by just people saying it and then writing it down, and then finding old ancient scripts that literally have the exact same word for word text that we read in our Bible today. That is just amazing. But the big part that really stands out to me when talking about apologetics or defending the faith or understanding why we believe what we believe is that why would these men who obviously saw the truth, they saw that Jesus came, that he lived a perfect life, that he died, and that he rose again. Why would they die? Almost all of them, a good chunk of the apostles or the disciples died for their faith. Why would they die for something they absolutely knew wasn't true? Now, if somebody is delusioned or confused and they believe something is true, like say a cult, and they believe truly in their head that something is true, then yes, that makes sense that they would lie about it, because it's not even a lie. It's they really do believe that it's true. And so they may die for something that they believe so strongly is true, even though it's not true. And to anyone else seeing it would be yeah, that's obviously not true. But with Jesus, they literally saw him rise again. They saw him 3 days after he was dead. He came and literally appeared in the room and was just hey, why would they lie about that? So they're literally making up that Jesus came back to life, completely pretending, and then continuing that lie while they're getting tortured, while they're getting arrested, while the gospel is being persecuted. And then when they literally are put to death for it, it just doesn't make sense. No one would do that knowing that they're lying. They would just be I don't care enough to lie about this, right? But because they cared enough to tell the truth, because it was the truth, it makes sense that they would actually go to death for this. Because unless you believe something is true, you are not going to die for a lie. You're just not. Another thing I hear often is that why did God have to send Jesus, his son? I think we sometimes forget the fact that Jesus is God, and so God is the Holy Spirit, and so the Holy Spirit is Jesus and God. They're all three in one. They're all the same person in three different persons. So when Jesus was sent to earth by God, he also is God in form of man, making the decision to come down. So sometimes we like to differentiate God and Jesus and be well, God is the one who did all of these really awful things and all these judgments and really harsh judgments on people, right? But then we like to be well, Jesus is the more compassionate one. They're the same person. It's three in one. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's very hard to wrap your brain around, but it is true. We have a triune God. He is three people in one God. So God sent his son, but also he sent himself, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'm super excited to dive into the life of Jesus. So if you're interested in this, please follow along. I'm going to make this a however many part series it needs to be to get through all 4 of the Gospels, but I would love for you to join me. Have a good day.